Webster defines crunch time as a critical moment or period, like the end of a game, when decisive action is needed. Every sports fan knows this time in the game. Your palms sweat just a little more, your heart races just a little bit faster, and you live and die with every play until the final seconds tick off the clock and you're either celebrating a victory or disappointed by the defeat. The team at Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network understands just how critical these moments are. For us, it begins as soon as the next set of games are on the board. We evaluate the opening lines and any breaking news throughout the week. We cover each game inside and out, whether it's from inside the locker room to a huddle down on the field, the court, or the ice. We take you inside the meeting room with scouts, coaches, and executives. We have our fingers on the pulse of all the sports that we cover: the National Hockey League, NBA, college basketball, college football, and the National Football League. We are the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and we're here to help you find your sports advantage. After all the data has been crunched, we then turn it over to Kenneth for the best analysis around. His unique perspective in both understanding the data and how it applies to the game and how you win is the Crunch Time Sports Advantage. Are you ready? The Crunch Time Jet is fueled and ready for takeoff, and the Crunch Time Express is about to leave the station. Your VIP pass has been approved, so all aboard.
Welcome to the 2024 College Football Team Autopsy Report. An autopsy report is a document that summarizes the findings of an autopsy, an examination of a body after death. It includes details of the examination, tests, and observations performed, as well as the cause and manner of death. Just like a real autopsy report, the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network College Football Autopsy Report examines a team's body of work after the season has concluded. This report includes a review of the team's season win total and whether they met expectations, key offensive, defensive, and special teams metrics that shaped the season, a deep dive into coaching decisions, including situational play and fourth down aggressiveness, a final season grade, evaluating execution, performance in key moments, and consistency, the final verdict, analyzing what went right, what went wrong, and what must be fixed for 2025. With the 2024 season in the rearview mirror, it's time to examine the patient. To present the findings, we have called in our Chief Medical Examiner and Senior Analyst, Kenneth.
And welcome back into the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network Team Autopsy Report. Folks, we got the Penn State Nittany Lions here on the autopsy table. Looking forward to this breakdown, and I got you for the next 28 minutes, so we're not going to waste any time. For all of our YouTube viewers, thank you for joining us, as well as those streaming this on our Twitter feed at Crunch Time VIP. For those of you that are listening on your favorite podcast platform, thank you for joining us as well. Don't worry, anything that I reference on the screen here, I'll be sure to communicate that to you as well. As always, I got you covered. Let's start right there with the head coach, James Franklin. Just completed his 14th year as a head coach, 11 of those there in Happy Valley. Now, his 3 years at Vanderbilt, pretty solid when you're considering the resources he had to work with. 24 wins, 15 losses, a win percentage of 62%. In his 11 seasons as the head coach of Penn State, James Franklin is 101 wins, 42 losses, a winning percentage of 71%. Now, we know the bugaboo for James Franklin, and that's when he steps up in weight class with those, at the time, those two giants there in the Big Ten did not fare so well. So we're going to dive deep into the numbers and look at Penn State from an overall standpoint, their offense. Then we'll go to their defense. We'll talk about their special teams. We'll talk about the coaching and situational play for Penn State last year. But first and foremost, we're going to get right there to the betting win total. The season win total for Penn State was 9.5 back in June. folks, we felt as confident as any number going over as far as a season win total than this one. I thought that the books set that entirely too low and did not take into account the schedule that Penn State would be going up against. Now, when we look at our composite win total, this is our in-season win predictor here, and there are three very distinct but highly predictive as far as giving us an indication of a team's win total. We actually had Penn State at a 9.7, so basically we had them as a 10-win team last season. Of course, they were able to get one better than that, and I think when I look at their schedule, I'll be able to pick out exactly one. Speaking of schedule, okay, there are two things that we evaluate when we're looking at a team schedule. Their strength of schedule and then their strength of record. Now, when you play in an overexpanded conference like the Big Ten is now, bringing in those four former teams from the Pac-12, you see how these schedules can really get lopsided. Now, you're only going to control about 20 to 25% of your schedule. And with the Big Ten playing non-conference games, that's more like 20% there. So that's your non-conference you control. Your conference schedule, it's purely a luck of the draw. So for Penn State, a strength of schedule of 0.452, that was 44th out of 134 teams last year. So not an overly difficult schedule. But however, when you look at their strength of record, basically we look at it as your opponent's winning percentage. 0.458, 115th out of 134 teams. So not only was their schedule a little light from the opponent's power ranking standpoint, their opponent's records were worse, significantly worse than what their strength of schedule is, basically looking at their power ranking. So let's pull that graphic up on the screen here, and we're going to go through that, and you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. So West Virginia, 6-6. Bowling Green, 7-5. Kent State, the worst team in college football last year because they were 0-12. Illinois was 9-3. UCLA was 5-7. USC was 6-6. But we had them significantly higher power ranked than what their record was. Wisconsin 5-7. Again, power ranked higher than what their record was. Ohio State was 10-2. Washington was 6-6. Purdue 1-11. Minnesota 7-5, and Maryland 4-8. Now, I said I would be able to quickly find a game that they won that they probably should have come up a little bit short. Look no further than that Minnesota game there when they won that game 26-25. Now, let's talk about, we've talked about their opponents' records. Let's take a look at the quality of opponents' defensive power rankings. I'm going to use a number of 68 because that's how many Power 4 teams we had last season. So West Virginia was power ranked defensively 59th. One spot ahead of them was Penn State's next opponent in Bowling Green, 58th. Illinois was 54th. UCLA was 50th. USC was 38th. Wisconsin 36th. Ohio State had the number one power ranked defense for us last year. Washington was 43rd. Minnesota was 18th last season. So 9 of their opponents were inside of that top 68. And of course, we know the 2 that were outside of the top 100 in Purdue and Kent State there. So you average that out, you're looking at an average power ranking from a defensive standpoint for Penn State's offense that they went up against on a week in and week out basis of 57. You're talking about a team defensively that would have probably been best case scenario 6-6 there. So again, not the most difficult slate of defenses. That's despite playing 2 teams that were inside of the top 20 in Ohio State and Minnesota. So let's break down Penn State's offensive numbers here. And for their offense, I'm going to give you the NCAA average team in that category, Penn State's accounting stat number for that category, and then our adjusted number for that category. When we get to the defensive side of the ball, I'm just going to give you Penn State's accounting stat number and then our adjusted number for that category. So average team last season scored about 28 points per game. Penn State was at 33.6. However, when we adjust for opponent, that goes back down to almost where the average is of 28.8. So this offense, from when we adjust for the defenses that they went up against, about 5 points less than what they were actually scoring. Now, average teams passing yardage per game, 227. We had Penn State at 200. Well, the counting stats had them at 247 per game. We had them at 240 per game. So not a big difference there, just a little bit better than the average team in that category. Now, this is where Penn State absolutely made their bones last year. Average team ran the ball for about 160 yards per game. Penn State accounting stats say 202 yards per game rushing. Our adjusted number has them at 188, so still better than the average team in that category. And then total offense, average team was about 387 yards per game. Penn State was at 449 yards per game, but when we adjust that for opponent, see about a 21 yard per game regression there, 428 yards per game. Again, still significantly higher than what the average team produced last season. Now let's talk about drives and conversions here. Average team drives ending with a touchdown or a field goal last season was about 40%. Penn State was at 49.7%. So basically, 1 out of every 2 drives for Penn State last year ended in either a touchdown or a field goal. That's how you average over 30 points per game. Now, their drives ending with a touchdown. Average team last season was about 29%. Again, Penn State outpacing that number, 36%. And then on third down conversions, average team was about 39% last season. Penn State was at 43%. Now, this team surrendered 22 sacks per game, 22 sacks on the season last year. That's about 2 fewer than the average team gave up. So did a really good job of protecting their quarterback there, and taking care of the ball was phenomenal. 10 turnovers during the regular season for Penn State. That is absolutely phenomenal. Now, let's talk about our 3 E's here. How effective, explosive, and efficient was the Penn State offense last season? Well, they were 8th in effectiveness for us last season, 20th in explosive offense, and then 29th in efficiency. Penn State Nittany Lions finished the regular season as our 17th ranked offense in college football. Got a top 20 offense, you're probably doing a pretty good job on the win-loss record there. Now, quarterback Drew Allar played in 16 games last year because this team made a deep run in the playoffs, completed 66.5% of his passes, 3,327 yards. But here's a number that we're okay with, 24 touchdowns, 8 INTs. You look at it this way, this kid played in 16 games last year. He was basically throwing an interception 1 out of every 2 games. That is a recipe that future NFL teams will look at. He's not making a lot of mistakes, and he's helping his team put the ball in the end zone. 24 touchdowns, just 8 INTs, not bad production there. 8.4 yards per attempt. Tells me he's pushing the ball down the field a little bit there. And then yards per completion, 12.7. Again, doing a really good job of pushing the ball down the field when it was there for Drew Allar. We know about the talented running backs coming back in Katron Allen and, of course, his running mate there in Big Nick Singleton. So you're talking about over 2,200 yards rushing coming back and 20 rushing touchdowns. This team has got some production coming back on the offensive side of the ball. Let's take a look at the defensive numbers here. And again, we're going to stick with that baseline of 68. Want to see how many Penn State's opposing offenses had a offensive ranking inside of that top 68. So West Virginia was 36th. Illinois was 45th. USC was 27th. Wisconsin 66th. Ohio State was 8th. Minnesota was 58th. And Maryland was 60th. Just 7 of their opponents were inside of that top 68. You're now talking about an average offensive power ranking that this Penn State defense went up against, 67th. So you're talking about, you're thinking about it, we had 68 Power 4 teams last season, and Penn State's average offensive power ranking for their opponent was 67. You can kind of venture to guess. I'm going to say that this offense was probably on a team that was probably 5-7 last year. So this Penn State defense did not face the elite caliber of offenses. Just one of their opponents in Ohio State was ranked inside of the top 25. This Penn State team did not face high caliber offenses week in and week out. So let's take a look at their numbers. And again, just the accounting stat and the adjusted number. Defensive points per game allowed, 16.4 points per game. When we adjust that, it goes up just a point to 17.4 points per game. So still below the average team there. Makes sense. Passing yards per game allowed, 179 yards per game. When we adjust for opponent, that pass defense was even better, 156 yards per game, almost a 23-yard improvement. The run defense looks great. When we adjust, looks a little bit differently. This team in the regular season gave up an average of 104 yards per game to their opponents. However, when we adjust for opponent, that goes up to 141. So more closer to an average run defense than the elite number that you would think looking at that accounting stat number. And then total offense allowed per game, 282 yards per game. When we adjust for opponent, that goes up about 15 yards to 297, still well below the NCAA average there. Now, opponents' drives ending with a score. Remember, that's a touchdown or field goal, 31%, about a 9 percentage point improvement over the average. Just 17.1% of their opponents' drive ended with a touchdown. That's absolutely stellar defense. And then their opponents only converting on third downs, 34%. This Penn State defense was absolutely body rocking opposing teams' quarterbacks, 42 sacks during the regular season. Folks, to put that in perspective, the average team had about 24 sacks during the regular season. So this is not including their playoff stats. This is their regular season data. 42 sacks in a 12-game season. That's yeoman's work there. Their opponents converted 16 out of 28 fourth down tries there. So 57% is what their opponents were converting on fourth downs. A little bit worse than what the average team was last season. This defense also forced 17 turnovers. So we're going to see how that plus-minus ratio looks there for Penn State. Their special teams, if I had to sum up their special teams, I would just say reliable but not elite. Right on the average as far as field goal percentage there of 76%. But the punt unit was absolutely phenomenal. 46.2 yards per punt. That was 8th best in the country last year. So excellent job there. Want to take a quick look to see if their punter was a upperclassman or not. Raleigh Thompson, the young man, transferred from Florida Atlantic. Looks like he may have another year if he's back on the roster. So big time weapon there in the punting game. Now, let's take a look at the coaching breakdown here. This team did not commit a lot of penalties, just 4.9 penalties per game. That's one less than the average team last season. Great job of not getting unsportsmanlike penalties because your penalty yardage was only 44 yards and penalties per game. So still about, let's call it 9 fewer yards and penalties. So basically less than a first down. Great job there. Now, James Franklin, 1-score games. You were in 6. Pardon me. So in 6 games that were 1-score contests that Penn State was in last year, and that includes the Big Ten championship game and the playoffs. 6 1-score games. Penn State was 3 wins and 3 losses, losing in the playoffs when they did, losing in the Big Ten championship game against Oregon. So those numbers get included there. Against quality opponents, Penn State faced 6 quality opponents. Remember, this team played in a Big Ten championship game and in the playoffs. 5 wins, 1 loss. So that speaks more to they didn't really have to play quality opponents in the regular season outside of Illinois, Ohio State there. So interesting, James Franklin. That's all I got. Interesting. This team was, as far as this coach going for it on 4th down, 13.5% there. That ranks 77th out of 144 qualifying coaches last season. So about average going for it on 4th down. And to be honest with you, they probably should have been even more aggressive. 25 attempts on 4th down last season, converted 18 of them. That's 72%, 19 percentage points better than the average team last year. I probably would have rolled the dice just a little bit more when I'm converting at that kind of rate. So a lot of things that we like, Coach Franklin, not being able to continue to get those wins in 1-score games. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Now, let's take a look at how this team looked in their wins from an offensive standpoint, and then we'll get to the defensive numbers. Remember, this team played some additional games here, so 13 wins, 3 losses, and that includes all of the postseason. So let's take a look at how this offense looked in those 13 victories, and then we'll come back and take a quick look at how they looked in those 3 losses that they had. So when this team was winning, 35 points per game on the offensive scoreboard, 241 yards per game passing on 27 attempts. That's an 8.9 yards per attempt, 12.7 yards per completion. But here's going to be a common theme for Penn State, whether they won or lost. They could absolutely tote the rock. 39 rushing attempts in their victories, 202 yards per game rushing, 5.2 yards per rushing attempt. That's fantastic. This team on 3rd downs was converting at 46%, 77% in those 4th down situations in those victories, just 9 total turnovers during the regular season. Now, let's take a look at their 3 losses. This is going to include the postseason. 25 points per game, 170 yards per game passing on 28 attempts. Now, the yards per passing attempt does go down by almost 3 yards to 6.2, 11.4 yards per completion. The run game, as I mentioned, was still dominant. 36 rushing attempts, 205 yards, even in their losses. So even when they were playing better teams, this team could absolutely still run the ball. 5.7 yards per rushing attempt. The big swing is the third down conversion. Just 27% conversion in those games where they lost. 1 out of 2 on fourth downs in those 3 losses. So probably could have been a little bit more aggressive there. Now, as far as the defense goes, this defense in those 13 victories, averaging 13 points per game, 181 yards per game passing on 30 attempts, 6.1 yards per passing attempt, 10.4 yards per completion. Their opponents attempted 32 rushing attempts for just 89 yards per game, 2.8 yards per rushing attempt. This defense, 33% conversion rate is what their opponents were on third downs, 57% on fourth downs. Now, as far as the games where they lost, 31 points per game allowed, 244 yards per game passing on 29 attempts. So in those 3 losses, gave up about 63 more passing yards per game on about the same amount of attempts. 8.4 yards per passing attempt allowed, 12.4 yards per completion. Now, this rush defense started to leak a little bit. 42 rushing attempts by their opponents in those 3 losses, 159 yards. It is the body blows of having to tackle a ball carrier 42 times that will absolutely start to wear down the defense. Still a really good yards per rushing attempt, just 3.8 yards per rush attempt allowed. Now, their opponents on third downs, 46% in those 3 losses there. So that's kind of the tale of the tape for Penn State there. Offense struggled a little bit. Defense did not get off the field enough against the run game, and that's going to be something that this team has to address going forward. Now, they'll be going forward without high first-round pick in Tyler Warren, but like I said, bringing back the quarterback, bringing back those 2 talented running backs, that's a pretty good way to start off a campaign there for Penn State. Let's go ahead and get to the final grade and the final verdict. And the Penn State Nittany Lions will get a final grade of an A-. This team was able to secure 11 wins in the regular season. Only that 1 loss coming against Ohio State. So, what did we like? Strong rushing attack, elite defense in key situations, and did a really good job of keeping their opponents out of the end zone. Now, we talked about it. Struggled at times with some explosive plays, more so out of the passing game there when they stepped up in weight class, and needed to probably be a little bit more assertive going forward on fourth downs there. So, the final verdict for Penn State. Absolutely playoff caliber team, but lacked explosiveness and consistency in the red zone at times. Fixing that offensive efficiency will be the key for a championship run next season for Penn State. Penn State demonstrated the ability to perform in key situations, regular season notwithstanding. When they played the best team on their roster, had an opportunity to close that game and just could not get the door all the way closed. So what does Penn State need to fix in 2024? I want to see this team develop even more of a passing game going forward. I like some of the things that I saw from the quarterback last year in Drew Allar, not making the mistakes. That tells me I can trust him a little bit more to push the ball down the field because he's not going to put it in harm's way. Key number 2, keep the ground game going. And that's going to start not with just those 2 running backs. It's going to start with the big war daddies up front. Can we get the same kind of commitment to the ground game to where you're going to be able to ground opponents into submission? If you are able to do that, those 2 talented running backs will hit the crease and go hit their head on the scoreboard. And then finally, key number 3. This is for James Franklin. Big time players come up in big time games in big time ways. You as the head coach have to start coming up big time when you step up in competition. It's not good enough just to be good enough anymore. You have a talented roster. Time to get them over the hump. If Penn State can improve in these 3 areas that I just mentioned, Penn State can once again position itself as a formidable contender for the national championship in 2025.
Thank you for tuning into this podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and our deep dive into all things college football. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at CrunchTimeVIP for updates, insights, and more content. And make sure to visit our website at CrunchTimeSportsAdvantage.com for in-depth blogs, game previews, and information about our Crunch Time Express handicapping packages. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time for our next patient on the 2024 College Football Autopsy.